Hi, it's a pleasure to have you here. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Margaret's sudden passing shattered the fragile calm of our family like a lightning bolt on a clear day. The news arrived early in the morning, a curt phone call from the hospital that left me numb and Ethan staring blankly at the kitchen wall. It felt unreal. Margaret had been the unyielding matriarch, the one person no one imagined could simply vanish. Her absence settled over our home like a suffocating fog, turning every meal into a silent gathering of restless glances and unspoken fears. I watched Ethan drift through the days, avoiding my eyes, his phone always within reach, vibrating with calls he wouldn't take in front of me. Each time I asked him how he felt, he'd brush me off with a clipped "I'm fine," retreating into himself more with every hour. At night, the bed grew colder as he slipped out, claiming sleeplessness but never inviting me to join him. Margaret's death didn't just end a life, it cracked open every hidden resentment, and I felt the ground beneath my marriage start to quake. Beneath the polite condolences and casseroles neighbors dropped off, something darker was festering, and I could feel it wrapping its cold fingers around our once happy home. Margaret had always been difficult, but she loved fiercely. Her death left not just grief, but a vacuum of power no one was ready to fill. Ethan's sisters called daily, each trying to assert control over funeral plans, inheritance rumors bubbling beneath every suggestion. The tension swelled as relatives began arriving from out of town, suitcases in tow, faces tight with concern or thinly veiled greed. Old conflicts flared as siblings rehashed childhood slights, while I tried to keep peace among people who'd never accepted me as one of their own. Ethan's silence became louder than any argument, and I found myself crying alone in the bathroom, certain he blamed me for something I couldn't name. The weight of unspoken words pressed on my chest like a stone. I knew in my bones that Margaret's death wasn't just an end, it was the spark that would ignite a firestorm. The day of the funeral dawned gray and heavy, as if the sky itself mourned Margaret's passing. Rain threatened but never fell, the air humid enough to stick every uncomfortable word to our lips. At the cemetery, Ethan stood stiffly by my side, his hand limp in mine, eyes darting not to the priest or the coffin, but to his glowing phone screen tucked inside his pocket. His distant gaze cut deeper than any insult. He looked like he was waiting for the ceremony to end rather than honoring his mother's life. Margaret's sisters sobbed loudly at the graveside, their wails echoing off the cold marble headstones like a chorus of ghosts. Friends and extended family clustered in small groups, whispering theories about how Margaret had died so suddenly and who would take what from her estate. As the casket lowered, a hush swept over the mourners, but Ethan's phone buzzed again, and I caught the flash of annoyance on his face when he silenced it. I clenched his hand tighter, trying to anchor us both in the moment, but he didn't respond. When the final prayers ended, Ethan practically pulled me toward the waiting car, brushing past his aunts who reached out to console us. I felt humiliated by his coldness, my heart twisting every time someone offered me a pitying glance. The drive back to our house was silent but for the rain finally starting to fall, drops streaking the windows like tears neither of us dared to shed. Every bump in the road jolted me back to the truth, something was deeply wrong with Ethan, and whatever it was, it felt like the real cause of the icy distance spreading between us faster than any grief. That night after the funeral, the house felt cavernous, every creak in the old wood amplified by our silence. I tried to talk to Ethan, to ask him where he kept disappearing to, but he snapped that he needed space and left the room without another word. Hours later, I heard the front door close softly, footsteps fading into the night. I waited on the couch until sunrise, clutching my phone in case he called, but he never did. When dawn's light spilled across the living room, I knew sleep would never come, I needed answers. Driven by a gnawing dread, I grabbed Ethan's car keys and stepped into the garage, my hands shaking as I opened the passenger door. Inside, among empty water bottles and crumpled receipts, something caught my eye, a small, pink pacifier, impossibly clean and unfamiliar. My heart thundered as I turned it over in my hand, mind racing through every possibility before settling on the worst one. Why would Ethan have a baby's pacifier in his car? The air grew thin, the walls of the garage closing in around me as betrayal took shape in my thoughts. I stumbled back inside, the pacifier burning in my palm like a brand, every memory of late nights and hushed phone calls snapping into brutal clarity. There was no more denying it, Ethan was hiding something, or someone, and my heart told me this secret would destroy everything. Days after the funeral, a thick envelope arrived addressed to Ethan and me, its weight ominous in my hands. Inside was a formal letter from Mr. Harris, Margaret's lawyer, requesting our presence at his office for the reading of her last will and testament. The words blurred as I read them over and over, the significance of the moment sinking in like a stone in my chest. Ethan barely reacted, only nodding before slipping out of the room to take yet another mysterious phone call. I sensed his unease even as he tried to mask it with a practiced calm, the kind of calm that made me feel like a stranger in my own home. The days crawled by until the appointed time, each hour steeped in dread as I imagined what secrets Margaret's final words might reveal. I spent my nights replaying every conversation I'd had with her, searching for hints of what she intended to leave behind. When the day arrived, I dressed carefully, choosing a black dress Margaret had once complimented, hoping it would bring me some strength. Ethan was uncharacteristically tense, his eyes darting from the clock to his phone, avoiding my gaze whenever I tried to meet his eyes. The drive to Mr. Harris's office felt longer than any journey I'd taken, every mile stretching with the heavy silence that threatened to crack me open. When we finally arrived, the somber building loomed over us like a mausoleum, its marble facade reflecting the storm clouds gathering above. Ethan's grip on my hand was perfunctory, cold, and brief as we stepped inside. I braced myself for the coming storm, knowing instinctively that this meeting would change everything I thought I knew about our marriage and the woman who had both ruled and haunted our lives. The conference room was suffocatingly warm, crowded with Margaret's closest relatives, each one wearing a polite mask over eyes brimming with suspicion and greed. The air smelled faintly of stale coffee and expensive perfume, a sickly combination that mirrored the tension crackling between the people seated around the heavy mahogany table. Whispers rose and fell like waves as cousins and aunts speculated on who would walk away with the largest share of Margaret's fortune. I took my place next to Ethan, who kept shifting in his seat, glancing nervously at the door every few minutes. The tick of the clock on the wall punctuated the silence between bursts of forced laughter or sharp mutterings, each sound slicing deeper into my growing dread. Every time someone met my eyes, their polite smiles didn't reach their eyes, and I felt like an intruder among a family waiting to devour itself. Mr. Harris finally entered, his presence silencing the room instantly as he placed a thick folder on the table with deliberate care. He offered his condolences with the gravity of a man who'd done this too many times before, his voice smooth and emotionless. I could feel Ethan's leg bouncing beside me, his impatience barely contained as he clenched his jaw. The lawyer's measured words did nothing to ease the rising tension, instead, they magnified it, every pause a reminder of the stakes about to be revealed. I forced myself to breathe evenly, praying for strength as I sensed that Margaret's final wishes were more than just instructions for her possessions, they were a final act meant to expose long-hidden truths. The air grew heavier with each second, the storm outside beginning to rumble as if nature itself braced for what was coming. Just as Mr. Harris cleared his throat to begin reading, the conference room door burst open with a loud clatter, every head snapping toward the noise. Ethan stood there, breathless and disheveled, but he wasn't alone. A young woman I had never seen before clung to his arm, her wide eyes darting nervously around the room. In her other arm, she cradled a newborn swaddled in a pale blue blanket, the baby's soft coos piercing the stunned silence like a siren. A collective gasp swept the room as the family's eyes flicked from Ethan's face to the baby's delicate features, many already connecting dots I desperately hoped weren't real. My own breath caught painfully in my throat as Ethan guided them forward, ignoring my gaze entirely, his expression unreadable and cold. Chairs scraped back and hushed curses drifted through the air as the woman hesitated before taking a seat beside Ethan, who placed a possessive hand on her shoulder. I could feel every eye shift toward me, their curiosity tinged with cruel delight as they waited for my reaction to this surreal betrayal unfolding before us all. Mr. Harris's composure slipped just enough for me to see the shock in his eyes before he quickly gathered himself and ordered everyone to sit down. My heart pounded so violently I thought it would tear itself apart, but I forced myself to remain seated, my hands gripping the armrests like lifelines. In that moment, the truth I had feared since finding the pacifier in Ethan's car materialized with brutal clarity, setting the stage for the storm that was about to erupt in Margaret's name. Time seemed to slow as Ethan introduced the young woman to everyone with a smirk that made my skin crawl, calling her Chloe and describing her as a close friend who needed support after a rough time. But as I looked at the baby's tiny face, a chill swept over me. The resemblance to Ethan was undeniable, from the shape of the eyes to the dark hair curling at the crown of the child's head. Murmurs spread like wildfire around the room as relatives exchanged shocked and delighted glances, hungry for scandal. My body felt rooted to the chair, my vision tunneling as I realized the horrifying truth. Ethan had not only been unfaithful, he had fathered a child with another woman right under my nose. I could hear the blood roaring in my ears, drowning out the lawyer's attempts to restore order in the suddenly chaotic room. Chloe's gaze flickered to mine, her expression a mixture of guilt and fear, but she clung tighter to Ethan's hand. Each second stretched into an eternity as the walls of the conference room seemed to close in, suffocating me with humiliation and rage. As I struggled to breathe, Ethan leaned back with a confidence that twisted my stomach, his posture exuding ownership of the situation while I sat there exposed and alone. He whispered something into Chloe's ear that made her nod, emboldening her to press the baby closer to her chest like a shield. My mind reeled back through every late night, every vague excuse, every shift in Ethan's mood that I had dismissed as stress. They all aligned now into one brutal narrative of betrayal. I could feel every eye on me, some pitying, others gleefully savoring the spectacle. The lawyer's voice returned, trying to steer the gathering back to the will, but his words were distant echoes in a room that had become an arena for my devastation. I clenched my fists so hard my nails cut into my palms, vowing silently that I would not let Ethan's lies destroy me without a fight. A crushing weight settled over me as I sat frozen in my chair, unable to tear my eyes from the child who represented the death of everything I thought I knew about my marriage. My mind refused to accept the scene before me, yet the whispers rising like venomous smoke around the room confirmed that I wasn't trapped in a nightmare. This was my reality. Every breath burned as I struggled to keep my composure, refusing to give the gathered vultures the satisfaction of seeing me break. My hands trembled uncontrollably in my lap while Ethan avoided my gaze, his focus solely on Chloe and the baby, as if they were the only people who mattered now. The lawyer's measured voice sounded muffled, words about estates and assets floating above me without meaning. The room felt impossibly hot, each exhale stealing what little strength I had left as I stared at the floor to avoid the pity and judgment in every glance cast my way. Inside, something cracked, a deep fracture of trust that bled into every memory I had of Ethan. As I tried to steady myself, I realized the balance of power had shifted in the most public and humiliating way possible. Ethan had brought his secret out into the open, and with it, he had stolen every illusion I'd clung to about our life together. Chloe's nervous shifting in her seat only amplified the echo of my heartbreak, her presence a constant reminder of the nights Ethan had chosen someone else over me. My mind screamed for answers, for an explanation, but I couldn't force words past the knot in my throat. Around me, relatives sat in a tense, electrified silence, all waiting for the next explosion. I swallowed the rising sobs and squared my shoulders, knowing that the time for quiet suffering was over. Even if I didn't yet know how to fight back, I was determined not to let this betrayal define me forever. Mr. Harris cleared his throat with a gravity that demanded attention, cutting through the stunned silence that had settled like a shroud over the room. His eyes swept over each of us, lingering on Ethan and Chloe for a heartbeat before landing on me with a flicker of sympathy quickly masked by professional detachment. Opening Margaret's will with deliberate care, he began reading her final words aloud, his voice low and steady, each syllable weighted with an authority that made the room hold its breath. He spoke of Margaret's pride in her children and grandchildren, of her regrets and her hopes for peace among her family after her passing, each line a painful reminder of the woman who had once been a force of nature in all our lives. I forced myself to listen, even as every word felt like it cut deeper into the raw wound Ethan had just torn open. As Mr. Harris continued, the tension in the room grew tauter with every sentence, the polite masks worn by our relatives beginning to slip. Eyes darted from one person to another, silently calculating where they stood in Margaret's hierarchy of affection and wealth. Ethan shifted impatiently beside Chloe, his knee bouncing with barely concealed agitation as if he already knew what the will would say. I sat perfectly still, clinging to Margaret's words like a lifeline, desperate to find some sign that she had seen the truth of what was happening around her before she died. The ticking of the wall clock filled the spaces between the lawyer's pauses, each second stretching impossibly long as the storm outside intensified, thunder rumbling like a warning that the real tempest was still to come. Mr. Harris's voice softened slightly as he began listing the first bequests, each one a small sentimental token left to Margaret's distant relatives, her antique brooch to a niece in Chicago, an old set of porcelain dolls to a cousin overseas. The atmosphere shifted as the greed in the room momentarily gave way to curiosity, every face turning toward the lawyer as he revealed each unexpected name in the will. These little surprises kept everyone on edge, the hush punctuated by occasional gasps when an estranged relative's name appeared, stirring old rivalries. I watched Ethan's smirk fade with each announcement that didn't involve him, his jaw tightening as the lawyer's reading continued without acknowledging his existence. A cold thrill ran through me at his discomfort, even as confusion swirled inside me about Margaret's intentions. Chloe squirmed in her seat, clearly unnerved by the drawn-out reading, clutching the baby closer as whispers rose around us like an ominous tide. As the list of small gifts grew, tension mounted again. It was clear Margaret had orchestrated these initial surprises to build suspense before delivering her final blow. Mr. Harris paused several times, letting the silence thicken to the point of suffocation, each moment stretching the nerves of everyone present. The thunder outside grew louder, rattling the windows as if to mirror the storm brewing in that conference room. My heart pounded with every name read aloud, both dreading and craving the moment Margaret's final wishes regarding Ethan and me would finally be revealed. Eyes flicked between Ethan and me with every passing second, family members shifting uncomfortably as if anticipating an explosion. The room felt like it was balanced on a knife's edge, ready to tip into chaos with just a single word from the lawyer's lips. Ethan's posture changed as the reading reached its midpoint, his shoulders relaxed, and he leaned back with a smug expression spreading across his face. His eyes glittered with barely hidden arrogance as he whispered something to Chloe that made her lips curl into a tentative smile, both of them convinced the remainder of the will would secure their future. I could almost see the calculations ticking behind his eyes as he imagined the fortune he believed was rightfully his, the inheritance he planned to use to build a life with the woman who had shattered mine. Every time I glanced at him, he looked away deliberately, his confidence a knife twisting deeper into the wound he had opened in front of everyone. The audacity of his composure, so certain of victory even after the chaos he had caused, filled me with a quiet fury that steadied my spine. Relatives around the table seemed to sense Ethan's growing smugness, some exchanging knowing looks, others appearing uncomfortable at his brazen display. Chloe's hand stopped trembling as she took strength from Ethan's apparent certainty, adjusting the baby's blanket with a care that looked almost rehearsed. Mr. Harris took a deliberate sip of water, eyes flicking briefly to me with something like a warning before he continued. The air felt electric with expectation, every breath shared in the room tinged with the scent of rain seeping in from outside. The storm clouds gathered darker beyond the conference room windows, flashes of lightning illuminating faces locked in masks of hope, fear, and quiet rage. I clenched my jaw, refusing to let Ethan's arrogance break the fragile control I had left. With the tension at its peak, Mr. Harris's voice dropped an octave, the words falling like heavy stones as he revealed that Margaret had updated her will just weeks before her death. Gasps erupted around the table as he announced that I, not Ethan, was appointed the primary beneficiary of Margaret's estate, including the family home and her substantial financial assets. The words didn't register immediately. It felt like time had slowed, my ears ringing as the magnitude of what had just been said crashed over me like a tidal wave. Ethan's chair scraped violently against the floor as he bolted upright, his face contorting in disbelief and rage, hands clenched into fists as he demanded an explanation. Chloe's mouth fell open, her knuckles white around the baby, horror dawning in her eyes as the future she'd been promised shattered before her. Mr. Harris calmly repeated the clause, clarifying that Margaret's decision had been formalized with witnesses and notarized, leaving no room for contestation. The silence that followed was absolute, the kind of hush that sucks the air from a room, every person present stunned into immobility. Outside, thunder cracked so loudly it rattled the table, a perfect echo of the tempest unleashed in the conference room. My heart hammered as I struggled to process the impossible truth. Margaret had trusted me above her own son, and her final act was a shield against his betrayal. Around me, relatives whispered in shocked disbelief, their shifting alliances visible in every furtive glance. The balance of power had flipped, and for the first time I felt the faintest glimmer of hope piercing the darkness. Ethan's face turned a dangerous shade of red as he slammed his fists onto the table, the sharp crack of his rage reverberating through the stunned silence. He shouted that it was impossible, that Margaret would never have betrayed him in such a cruel way, his voice rising to a hysterical pitch that made Chloe flinch beside him. His eyes burned with desperation and disbelief as he swept papers off the table, scattering them like leaves in a storm, his composure completely obliterated. Relatives gasped and recoiled, some shielding their faces as if afraid he might turn his fury on them next. The lawyer's calm expression hardened into stern authority as he warned Ethan to sit down or risk being escorted out by security. But Ethan ignored him, his wild gaze locking onto me as if I were the architect of his downfall, his mouth twisting into a snarl. He accused me of forging the documents, of seducing Margaret into changing her will, his words thick with venom that splattered across the shocked room. Each accusation fell on the family like a hammer blow, fueling the rising whispers of scandal and disbelief. Chloe's eyes filled with tears as she tugged at Ethan's sleeve, her voice trembling as she begged him to stop before he made everything worse. But he was beyond reason, his rage a wildfire consuming every shred of dignity he once possessed. I sat frozen, refusing to look away from him, even as his fury threatened to swallow us both whole. The storm outside intensified, lightning flashing in quick succession as if nature itself was punctuating his every word with blinding fury. This was no longer a reading of a will, it had become a battlefield of truths and lies laid bare. Mr. Harris, unshaken by Ethan's outburst, reached calmly into his briefcase and retrieved a USB drive, his movements deliberate and steady as the room fell silent once more. He plugged it into a sleek laptop on the table and, with a few clicks, pulled up a video of Margaret recorded just days before her death. Her face appeared on the screen, older and wearier than I remembered, but her eyes were bright with a fierce determination that sent a shiver down my spine. She spoke directly to the camera, her voice tired but resolute as she explained her reasons for changing her will, saying she trusted me because I was the only one who had cared for her in her final days. Gasps echoed around the room as she recounted moments of Ethan's cruelty and neglect, moments I'd witnessed but never dared to speak aloud. Margaret's words were a final, irrefutable testament that sliced through Ethan's accusations with the precision of a scalpel, each sentence delivered with unwavering conviction. Her message ended with a direct warning to Ethan that any attempt to contest her decision would fail, her eyes boring into the lens with a severity that left no doubt she meant every word. Ethan slumped back into his chair as the video ended, his face pale and slack, the certainty he had flaunted moments before now replaced by hollow disbelief. Chloe's soft sobs filled the silence as she realized the foundation of lies Ethan had built their relationship upon was crumbling into dust. The lawyer closed the laptop with a quiet finality, the click of the case lock sounding like a judge's gavel sealing Ethan's fate. In that instant, the power shifted completely, Margaret's voice from beyond the grave restoring order with an authority even death could not diminish. As Mr. Harris sorted through the last of Margaret's documents, he pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope marked with my name in her familiar, looping handwriting. My hands trembled as he passed it to me, the room around me fading into a blur of hushed breaths and darting eyes as I opened it with painstaking care. Inside was a handwritten letter, each line heavy with emotion as Margaret poured out her gratitude, regret, and final confessions, her words a bomb and a blade all at once. She detailed Ethan's deceit, recounting the ways he had manipulated her finances and lied to those closest to them, her heartbreak palpable in every stroke of ink. My chest tightened as I read about moments I'd never known, late-night phone calls, secret meetings, and plans Ethan had made behind both our backs. Along with her words were photographs and documents she had collected in secret, evidence of Ethan's infidelity and financial schemes that left no room for doubt. Each piece of proof felt like a puzzle piece clicking into place, revealing the complete portrait of a man I realized I had never truly known. The weight of Margaret's trust in me filled my heart with a mixture of sorrow and fierce determination. She had entrusted me not only with her legacy but with the truth she could not bring herself to expose while alive. The envelope became a lifeline in my hands, a weapon and a shield all at once, granting me the strength to face the storm that still raged around us. For the first time since Margaret's death, I felt her presence beside me, guiding me through the darkness Ethan had tried so desperately to keep hidden. As I turned the last page of Margaret's letter, I found bank statements folded neatly behind her words, each one highlighting massive transfers Ethan had orchestrated from Margaret's accounts. The numbers were staggering, thousands of dollars siphoned into a series of hidden accounts bearing Chloe's name, transactions disguised through shell companies Margaret's sharp eye had finally uncovered. My hands shook as I absorbed the cold, indisputable proof that Ethan's betrayal wasn't limited to his heart, it extended into outright theft of the money his mother had intended for her legacy. The realization left me breathless, a hollow ache spreading through my chest as I remembered every time Ethan had brushed off Margaret's questions about missing funds. Chloe sat beside Ethan, eyes wide and uncomprehending as she caught glimpses of the papers, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Around us, relatives gasped and murmured, their shock giving way to disgust as they shifted away from Ethan, his carefully cultivated image crumbling like rotting plaster. Mr. Harris took the documents from my trembling hands and laid them out in the center of the table for everyone to see, his voice firm as he explained the trail of deceit Ethan had created. His words carried the weight of authority, and even those who had once defended Ethan now looked at him with open contempt. The storm outside continued to rage, thunder rolling overhead in time with the rising tension inside, nature itself seeming to condemn Ethan's crimes. Chloe's face turned pale as she absorbed the extent of Ethan's treachery, realization dawning that she had been little more than a pawn in his desperate schemes. I forced myself to meet Ethan's furious, panicked eyes, refusing to look away as the power shifted even further in my favor. Margaret's meticulous records had given me more than proof, they had given me the courage to see Ethan for what he truly was, and I would not let him escape the consequences of his own greed. The room erupted into chaos the moment Mr. Harris finished laying out the evidence, relatives standing abruptly as their anger spilled over in a chorus of outraged voices. Old wounds and resentments flared as siblings who had once been allies turned on each other, accusations flying over who had known what and when, the conference room devolving into a cacophony of shouted betrayals. Some pointed at Ethan with trembling fingers, demanding explanations for the lies they now realized had woven through the family for years. Others turned on Chloe, their fury laced with pity as they accused her of playing along, though her tear-streaked face revealed a woman who had been as deceived as the rest of us. I watched the chaos swirl around me like a hurricane, feeling strangely calm as I clutched Margaret's letter, the eye of the storm where everything finally made a twisted sort of sense. Mr. Harris tried repeatedly to restore order, his voice rising above the din but barely registering in the frenzy of anger and disbelief. Ethan's face shifted between rage and desperation as he attempted to shout down the accusations, his words drowned out by the growing tide of condemnation from every corner of the room. His sisters wept openly, mourning not only their mother's death but the betrayal of the brother they had trusted for so long. Chloe huddled protectively over her baby, sobs racking her body as she realized the dream Ethan had sold her was a lie built on stolen money and false promises. The storm outside lashed rain against the windows, the flashes of lightning illuminating faces twisted by grief, fury, and sorrow. Each revelation tore deeper into the family's fragile unity, exposing decades of festering wounds Margaret's death had forced into the light. The air felt thick with betrayal, every breath heavy with the knowledge that nothing could ever return to the way it had been. As the shouting continued, Chloe's composure shattered completely, her sobs rising above the din as she dropped to her knees beside Ethan's chair, clutching the baby to her chest as if it were the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. She confessed through tears that she had truly believed Ethan when he told her he was divorced, his words so convincing she had never questioned them even when whispers reached her ears. Her voice broke as she recounted the nights he had come to her with stories of a cruel, unfaithful wife, painting himself as a victim to earn her sympathy and her trust. Every word she uttered peeled back another layer of Ethan's deceit, exposing the depth of his manipulation to the stunned room around us. Relatives stopped shouting, their shock rendering them momentarily silent as Chloe's confession painted Ethan in even darker shades than before. Mr. Harris watched with somber eyes, his hands folded on the table as he let the raw, painful truth spill into the open. Ethan recoiled from Chloe's grasp, his face twisted in disgust as he hissed at her to stop, his words laced with venom that only confirmed every terrible thing she had revealed. Her sobs turned into hysterical wails as she begged forgiveness from everyone, pleading that she had never meant to hurt anyone and had thought she was building a family with a good man. The baby's thin cries punctuated the room like sharp needles, adding to the unbearable tension that hung between every person present. I felt an unexpected pang of pity for Chloe, realizing she was as much a victim of Ethan's lies as I was, her life upended by a man who cared for nothing but his own gain. The storm outside reached a fever pitch, wind howling against the walls as if the world itself was mourning the destruction Ethan had wrought. The weight of everything that had been exposed pressed down on us all, a suffocating reminder that the truth, once unleashed, could never be contained. The room fell into a tense, heavy silence as Mr. Harris retrieved one final document from his briefcase, his eyes scanning the paper before lifting them to meet mine with a grave expression. He announced that Margaret's last act had been to order a DNA test on the baby Chloe carried, the results enclosed and notarized among her final papers. As his voice rang through the stunned room, he declared that the child was not Ethan's, the paternity test proving with irrefutable certainty that someone else was the father. Gasps of disbelief swept the conference room like a gust of wind, Chloe's face going slack with shock as she clutched the baby even tighter, tears streaming down her cheeks. Ethan staggered back a step, his features contorting with confusion and rage as the foundation of his imagined future crumbled before everyone's eyes. Whispers erupted around us, the family's horror deepening as they realized the twisted web of lies had snared not only the adults but an innocent child. The weight of Margaret's final revelation settled over the room like a funeral shroud, suffocating in its brutal clarity. Ethan's fists clenched at his sides as he turned on Chloe, his voice rising into an enraged roar as he demanded to know who the real father was, his words sharp enough to cut the air. Chloe's sobs grew more frantic, her voice cracking as she swore she didn't know, that she had believed the child was Ethan's because that's what he had promised. Her pleas only fueled Ethan's fury, his face darkening with a dangerous intensity that made several relatives step forward as if ready to intervene. Mr. Harris cleared his throat sharply, reminding everyone they were still in a legal proceeding and that violence would not be tolerated, his eyes cold and unwavering as they pinned Ethan in place. The storm outside seemed to pound harder against the windows, each crash of thunder punctuating the chaos unfolding within. I felt a strange, hollow relief wash over me, knowing the truth was finally out and that no amount of Ethan's bluster could bury it again. Ethan's face twisted into a mask of pure hysteria as he realized the depth of the betrayal he himself had fallen victim to, his body swaying as if the weight of his own lies had finally crushed him. His eyes darted wildly around the room, searching for an ally but finding only a sea of disgusted, pitying faces that reflected the man he had truly become. He shouted incoherently at Chloe, his words tumbling over one another in a torrent of accusations and desperate denials, spit flying from his lips as he lost any remaining shred of composure. Chloe cowered, shielding the baby as Ethan's rage flared unchecked, her voice hoarse from crying as she tried to tell him she had loved him, that she had believed him. The room felt like it was shrinking, the storm's roar outside matching the tempest raging inside Ethan's mind as he slammed his fists against the conference table, rattling glasses and scattering papers. Mr. Harris stood, his imposing figure a barrier between Ethan and everyone else as he calmly but firmly ordered him to sit down or leave immediately. Ethan's eyes were wide and glassy, uncomprehending, as if he were staring into the abyss of his own downfall. Relatives shifted uneasily, some whispering prayers under their breath while others openly called Ethan a disgrace, their voices shaking with anger and grief. Each harsh word seemed to chip away at Ethan's bravado, his shoulders slumping as reality crashed down on him in unstoppable waves. Chloe sobbed quietly in her corner, rocking the baby who now whimpered along with her, both caught in the wreckage of a relationship built on deceit. Mr. Harris's face remained a mask of professional control, but even he couldn't hide the flicker of sadness in his eyes as he watched a once proud man disintegrate before him. I sat still, my hands resting on Margaret's letter, feeling every beat of my heart as a reminder that the woman who had trusted me had also seen what no one else dared admit. Lightning flashed again, illuminating Ethan's broken figure and the shocked faces around him, a moment frozen in time that would haunt us all forever. As Ethan's screams faded into hollow silence, memories I had tried so hard to bury came rushing back with merciless clarity, each one a blade slicing deeper into my already raw heart. I remembered countless nights when Ethan had come home late, his excuses paper-thin, his eyes cold and distant as he brushed off my worried questions with a dismissive wave. I saw the way he had pulled away from me in bed, how he had smiled at his phone in the darkness, convinced I couldn't see the glint of secret pleasure in his eyes. Images of holidays spent alone while he claimed to work extra hours flickered through my mind like a cruel slideshow, each memory poisoned by the knowledge of where he had truly been. I felt the burn of every time he'd called me paranoid, every moment he'd made me doubt myself while he built a life with another woman. The lies wove together into a suffocating net, each strand tighter than the last until it was a miracle I hadn't suffocated under the weight of his betrayal. As the memories continued their relentless assault, I realized with painful clarity how I had tried so desperately to cling to the fantasy of a happy marriage, blinding myself to the signs Margaret had seen so plainly. Tears welled in my eyes, not for Ethan, but for the woman I had once been, the one who believed love alone could fix a man determined to destroy himself and everyone who loved him. Around me, the conference room was quiet again, relatives stunned into silence by the revelations that had left no corner of our lives untouched. I felt the burden of my grief shift into something harder and sharper, a resolve that began to crystallize in the crucible of heartbreak. Margaret's voice echoed in my mind, reminding me that love was never meant to be blind, that trust should be earned and guarded. I took a deep breath, determined that this moment of searing pain would mark the beginning of my true strength, not the end of my story. Chloe's voice trembled as she lifted her head, her eyes red and swollen but resolute as she confessed the full extent of what Ethan had promised her. She revealed how he'd sworn he would divorce me as soon as Margaret passed, how he had painted a picture of a perfect life funded by an inheritance he claimed was guaranteed. Her words fell like hammer blows in the hushed room, each detail exposing Ethan's meticulous manipulation and the grand illusion he had spun for both of us. She described the lavish future he had promised her and the baby, a future built on the false certainty that Margaret would leave everything to him. The gasps of our relatives punctuated each new revelation, their eyes darting between Chloe's broken face and Ethan's pale, shaking form. Even those who had hesitated to judge him earlier now looked at him with open disgust, unable to deny the depth of his betrayal. Mr. Harris nodded grimly, his face like stone as Chloe's testimony confirmed everything Margaret's documents had already proven. As Chloe's words spilled out, the dam she had held back for months finally breaking, Ethan's expression grew darker with every passing second. His breathing became ragged as the web of lies he had woven unraveled before him in front of the very people he had once thought he could manipulate. I felt a cold fury settle over me, the final pieces of the puzzle falling into place with Chloe's anguished admissions. The room felt heavy with the weight of truth, every relative now united not in grief or greed, but in a shared horror at how far Ethan had gone to secure a future he never deserved. The storm outside wailed against the windows, wind rattling the glass like nature's own judgment on Ethan's sins. I clenched Margaret's letter tightly in my hand, vowing to carry her courage forward as I prepared for the fight that still lay ahead. As silence reclaimed the conference room after Chloe's confession, I felt an unexpected calm wash over me, the kind that only comes when there is nothing left to fear. I rose from my chair, my legs steady beneath me for the first time in what felt like forever, and fixed my gaze firmly on Ethan's shocked, hollow eyes. My voice trembled at first but grew stronger with every word as I declared I would honor Margaret's wishes completely, promising to protect her legacy and expose every last piece of Ethan's treachery. The words felt like fire on my tongue, burning away the last of my self-doubt and filling the room with a quiet authority that even the storm outside seemed to respect. Relatives watched with wide eyes as I spoke, some nodding silently, others wiping tears from their cheeks as the power shifted irrevocably. Chloe bowed her head in shame, her sobs quieter now but echoing in the tense stillness that followed my declaration. Mr. Harris's eyes shone with a flicker of approval as he folded his hands on the table, ready to help me carry out Margaret's final plans. Ethan's mouth opened as if to argue, but the words died before they could form, his shoulders slumping under the crushing weight of my resolve and the collective condemnation of everyone around him. I stood tall, refusing to look away, refusing to cower any longer before the man who had stolen so much from me. The storm thundered a final exclamation outside, lightning illuminating the room in a stark, white light that seemed to spotlight Ethan's downfall and my emergence from his shadow. Margaret's voice echoed in my memory, her love and faith in me giving me the courage I needed to face this reckoning. I drew a deep breath, feeling strength blossom inside me as I prepared to bring Ethan's lies into the light of day. This was my moment, the turning point where I stopped being a victim and became the protector of a legacy far greater than myself. Mr. Harris's voice broke the tense silence as he cleared his throat and announced with measured authority that Ethan's actions constituted fraud and embezzlement, serious crimes punishable by law. His words fell like thunder in the room, each one a stark reminder that what had transpired wasn't just a family scandal but a criminal conspiracy with real consequences. He explained that Margaret's meticulous records and the video testimony left no room for doubt or debate, and he strongly recommended immediate police involvement to ensure justice was served. Ethan's face drained of all color, his eyes darting wildly as he realized there was no escape, no lie left to hide behind. Several relatives gasped audibly, the gravity of the situation settling over them as they shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the storm's howl outside underscoring every word. Chloe sobbed quietly in her corner, her body rocking with the weight of her shattered illusions as she clutched her baby tighter. The air felt electrified with a mix of fear, anger, and grim satisfaction that Ethan would finally answer for his deceit. Mr. Harris calmly laid out the next steps, outlining how he would contact authorities and provide them with all necessary documentation, his precise words cutting through the remaining chaos like a scalpel. He assured everyone that Margaret's wishes would be carried out exactly as she intended, her estate protected from Ethan's grasp and the family shielded from further harm. The relatives who had once whispered and doubted me now turned their eyes to me with gratitude and respect, the room finally shifting from a place of betrayal to one of wary hope. Ethan sagged in his chair, the fight gone from his eyes as he stared blankly at the papers strewn across the table, the pieces of his ruined life laid bare for all to see. Outside, the storm began to subside, the wind quieting as if the world itself sensed the end of the chaos within. I exhaled slowly, the knowledge that justice would prevail filling me with a fierce, unshakable peace. As the shock settled over the room, Margaret's siblings rose one by one and crossed the space between us, their eyes filled with tears and faces etched with sorrow and relief. They embraced me tightly, whispering apologies for ever doubting me, their words soft but powerful as they vowed to stand beside me in honoring Margaret's wishes. The warmth of their support seeped into my bones, pushing back the cold emptiness Ethan had left behind and replacing it with a quiet strength I hadn't felt in years. Cousins and aunts who had once kept their distance now reached for my hands, offering comfort and promising to help restore the family's fractured bonds. Even those who had stood silently on the sidelines now stepped forward, their expressions filled with contrition as they recognized the courage it had taken for me to face the truth. The conference room, once a battleground, became a place of tentative healing as hearts opened and old grievances dissolved in the face of shared grief and newfound solidarity. Mr. Harris watched the scene unfold with a small nod, his eyes betraying a hint of emotion as he recognized the beginning of the family's reconciliation. Ethan slumped in his chair, isolated and defeated as the family he had once counted on turned away from him, their backs a silent but powerful judgment. Chloe sat apart, her tears quieter now as she watched the display of unity she would never be part of, her face pale with the realization of all she had lost. The storm outside had calmed to a soft drizzle, the gray light filtering through the windows lending the room a somber serenity that mirrored our collective exhaustion. I clung to Margaret's letter like a lifeline, its pages a reminder that even from beyond the grave, she had known how to bring us back together. The warmth of hands on my shoulders and the soft words of support whispered in my ears felt like a balm over every wound Ethan had inflicted. In that fragile moment, I knew Margaret's greatest wish was finally coming true. Her family, once torn apart by secrets, was beginning to heal. A sharp knock on the conference room door shattered the fragile calm, and two uniformed police officers stepped inside with grim expressions that silenced everyone instantly. Mr. Harris greeted them with a respectful nod before handing over a neatly organized folder filled with the evidence Margaret had gathered and Chloe had corroborated, his voice steady as he explained the situation. The officers moved toward Ethan, their presence heavy with authority as they informed him he was under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy, their words cutting through the air like a final, irreversible verdict. Ethan's eyes widened with wild panic as he jerked to his feet, his protests tumbling out in desperate, incoherent bursts that only underscored his guilt. One officer calmly took him by the arm while the other read him his rights, their professional detachment a stark contrast to Ethan's unraveling composure. The room watched in breathless silence, the only sounds the distant rumble of thunder and the rustle of papers as chairs shifted to give the officer space. As Ethan was escorted toward the door, his curses filled the room, venomous words directed at everyone he once thought he could control, his voice echoing with a rage that only highlighted how far he had fallen. Chloe buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs as Ethan disappeared from view, his footsteps fading into the hallway like the final note of a tragic song. Relatives exhaled in collective relief, the oppressive weight that had hung over us lifting at last with Ethan's departure. Mr. Harris straightened his jacket, his calm voice thanking the officers and assuring them the family would cooperate fully with the legal process. The storm outside had given way to a light drizzle, each drop against the windows sounding like a gentle promise of peace after the chaos. I stood tall among the family members, a sense of closure blooming in my chest as the door closed behind Ethan for good. Once the officers were gone and the room had settled into an uneasy quiet, Chloe slowly lifted her tear-streaked face, her eyes puffy and filled with remorse as she turned to me. Her voice was barely above a whisper as she begged for forgiveness, her words tumbling over each other as she confessed how completely she had believed Ethan's lies, how desperately she had wanted to build a family with him. She described nights spent waiting by the phone, hanging on his every promise, the months of being strung along with dreams that were never real. Each word carried the raw weight of a woman who had lost everything, her illusions shattered along with the man she thought would save her. The baby whimpered in her arms, its small cries punctuating the silence as Chloe's words hung between us like a fragile plea. Around us, relatives shifted uncomfortably, some sympathetic, others wary of the woman who had unknowingly deepened the family's wounds. Mr. Harris remained silent, his eyes watchful but kind as he allowed the moment to unfold without interruption. I felt a storm of emotion swirl inside me, anger, pity, exhaustion, but as I looked into Chloe's devastated eyes, I realized I didn't hate her. She had been a victim, just like me, swept up in Ethan's selfish schemes and left to pick up the pieces in the aftermath of his destruction. My voice was calm but firm as I told her I couldn't forget the pain we'd both endured, but I hoped she would find a way to heal and build a better life for herself and her child. Chloe's shoulders sagged with gratitude and heartbreak, tears streaming down her cheeks as she promised to leave and never cause more harm. The room remained quiet, every eye on us as we shared a brief, silent understanding that though we had been enemies by circumstance, we were survivors of the same storm. The drizzle outside softened further, the sun beginning to pierce through the clouds, casting a tentative light on a family learning how to forgive. After the police took Ethan away and the family began to gather themselves, I stood quietly, feeling Margaret's presence wrap around me like a warm, protective blanket. I knew that everything she had entrusted to me wasn't just an inheritance, it was a responsibility to honor the values she held dear, to heal the wounds Ethan had inflicted, and to rebuild the trust he had destroyed. The words of her final letter echoed in my mind as I promised myself to use the estate not for personal comfort but as a foundation for something good and lasting. I looked around the room at the faces of relatives who had once doubted me and saw their cautious hope, a fragile seed that needed careful tending if our family was to grow strong again. Mr. Harris met my gaze and gave a small nod of approval, his eyes filled with respect that steadied my resolve further. Even the baby, cradled quietly in Chloe's arms, seemed to sense the shift, its soft coo a reminder that the future depended on choices made in this very moment. As the last remnants of the storm faded beyond the windows, I raised my voice and told everyone gathered that I would dedicate Margaret's estate to causes she believed in, ensuring her kindness would live on through scholarships, donations, and projects that would help those who had suffered as we had. Murmurs of agreement and grateful smiles spread around the room, the energy transforming from tension and suspicion to cautious optimism. Chloe wiped her tears and gave me a small, grateful nod before rising to leave, her silhouette framed by the light breaking through the clouds. I felt a fierce determination swell in my chest, knowing that Margaret's legacy would not be tarnished by Ethan's greed but would instead become a testament to resilience and compassion. As I spoke with Mr. Harris about the legal steps ahead, the relief of taking control replaced the helplessness I had carried for so long. This was no longer the end of a marriage, it was the beginning of a life where I would choose my own destiny. The peace we found in the conference room was short-lived once news of Ethan's arrest broke, spreading like wildfire through town and igniting a scandal that consumed every conversation. Headlines painted lurid portraits of a man who had deceived his family, embezzled from his dying mother, and tried to manipulate everyone around him for his own gain. My name appeared alongside Ethan's in countless articles, though the tone shifted quickly as people learned the truth of what had really happened behind closed doors. Reporters gathered outside Margaret's house, cameras flashing as they tried to capture the fallen heir and the wife who had brought his crimes to light. Former friends and neighbors reached out with calls and messages, some apologizing for doubting me, others confessing their shock at how blind they had been to Ethan's true nature. The scandal gave me no satisfaction, only a dull ache as I realized how many lives had been touched by his lies and how far the ripples of his betrayal spread. Yet even as the chaos of public scrutiny threatened to overwhelm me, I held fast to the knowledge that the truth was out and Ethan's power over me was gone forever. In the days that followed, I found myself walking through crowds of curious onlookers, their whispers trailing behind me like shadows, each one a reminder of the life I was determined to leave behind. Mr. Harris worked tirelessly to shield me from the worst of the media frenzy, his calm presence a steadying force as he handled reporters and advised me on how to navigate the sudden attention. Margaret's siblings came to stay at the house, their presence a comforting reminder that family could still be a source of strength even after so much pain. Though the public spectacle was humiliating, it also served as a catharsis, burning away the final remnants of secrecy that had allowed Ethan to thrive in the dark. I kept my focus on the future, reminding myself with each new headline that Margaret's legacy was stronger than any scandal. The sun climbed higher each day, a quiet promise that life would continue and healing would come in its own time. As the weeks passed, the storm of scandal began to recede, and I turned my attention to the place Margaret had loved most, her home, the house that had stood through every family celebration and heartbreak. I decided to move back into the sprawling old residence, determined to breathe life and warmth back into the silent rooms that had borne witness to so much sorrow. Each day I opened windows to let in sunlight and fresh air, sweeping out the shadows Ethan's lies had left behind and filling the spaces with flowers Margaret had once adored. Relatives visited often, helping repaint faded walls and sharing stories that reminded us of better times, laughter beginning to echo in halls that had been silent far too long. Chloe kept her promise to leave quietly, sending a single letter of thanks before disappearing to build a life far from the wreckage Ethan had created. With every repaired floorboard and polished window, the house transformed from a mausoleum of grief into a sanctuary of hope and healing. I felt Margaret's spirit in every corner, her love infusing the walls as I worked to make her dream of a peaceful, welcoming home a reality once more. As I settled into my new life, I realized the house was not only a refuge for me but a symbol of survival for the entire family, a place where we could gather without fear of the past repeating itself. The garden Margaret had once tended became my favorite place, its overgrown beds slowly coaxed back to life under my care, each bloom a quiet victory against the darkness we had endured. Friends and neighbors stopped by with plants and seeds, their gifts small but meaningful gestures of solidarity that rebuilt connections frayed by scandal. I found myself smiling more easily, laughing without the tightness that had gripped my chest for so long, the shadows inside me giving way to light. The walls that had once echoed with anger now rang with warmth and music as I hosted dinners and gatherings that reminded everyone we were still a family. Margaret's house was alive again, and with it, so was I, finally free to build the life she had always hoped I would claim for myself. In the months that followed, I dedicated myself to rebuilding not only Margaret's home but also the fractured pieces of my own heart, seeking therapy and leaning on friends who reminded me I was not alone. Each session helped me unravel the layers of guilt and shame Ethan had planted in me, teaching me to separate his lies from my own worth and to forgive myself for not seeing the truth sooner. I began journaling daily, pouring my pain and small triumphs onto the page, the act of writing a quiet reclamation of my voice and agency. The more I opened up to those around me, the lighter I felt, the memories of betrayal softening into lessons instead of open wounds. Nights once haunted by restless sleep grew peaceful again, my dreams finally free of Ethan's shadow as I learned to trust myself and embrace the possibility of joy. As my strength returned, I reached out to old friends I had drifted from during my marriage, their warm welcomes a balm over years of isolation. Shared coffees and long walks reminded me how much love still existed in my life, untarnished by Ethan's manipulation. Family gatherings became brighter, filled with laughter instead of tense silences, the atmosphere shifting from brittle caution to genuine affection. The house blossomed with life, children's giggles echoing through the halls, proof that even the deepest wounds could heal when given time and care. Margaret's garden thrived under my hands, each blooming rose a symbol of the resilience I had discovered within myself. To honor the woman who had seen my true heart even when I couldn't, I established the Margaret Ellis Scholarship for young women who had experienced betrayal and hardship, determined to give them a chance to rebuild their lives with dignity. Applications flooded in from across the country, each story of resilience and hope reaffirming my conviction that Margaret's legacy could become a beacon for others. I worked closely with a local nonprofit to mentor recipients, offering not just financial support but guidance and encouragement to help them find their own paths forward. Community members rallied behind the cause, hosting fundraisers and donating time, creating a network of compassion that far exceeded what I had imagined possible. The scholarship became more than a tribute, it was a living testament to the power of kindness and the importance of standing by those society too often overlooked. At the first award ceremony, I stood before a room filled with bright, determined young women and spoke of Margaret's unwavering belief in the strength of the human spirit. Tears filled my eyes as I handed out the first scholarships, knowing each one represented a new chapter of hope, not just for them but for me as well. Friends and family gathered to celebrate, their applause ringing with pride as we honored a woman who had given so much love even in her final days. The energy in the room was electric with possibility, the air thick with gratitude and the promise of second chances. As I looked out at the smiling faces before me, I knew Margaret's dream had become a reality more beautiful than either of us could have imagined. Years later, I found myself strolling through Margaret's restored garden on a warm spring morning, the air filled with birdsong and the sweet scent of blooming flowers. The house stood proud and welcoming behind me, every window gleaming in the sunlight, a symbol of the peace we had fought so hard to claim. The scholarship program continued to thrive, each success story a reminder that even the deepest betrayals could give way to profound purpose. Family reunions filled the home with laughter, generations gathered under the same roof, the past scars now gentle reminders of how far we had come. I paused by the rose bushes, their blossoms heavy and fragrant, and felt a swell of gratitude for the storm that had taught me my true strength. As I closed my eyes and let the breeze wash over me, I sensed Margaret's presence beside me, her love woven into every petal, every brick, every breath of the home we had restored together in spirit. I smiled, knowing the darkness Ethan had brought had only made the light shine brighter, transforming pain into a legacy of compassion and resilience. Children's voices drifted from the house, carrying the promise of a future free from the shadows of old lies. My heart felt light and unburdened, every beat a quiet hymn of freedom and hope. I stepped forward, certain that Margaret's garden, and the life I had built, would continue to bloom for years to come.